Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. If you have a specific guest or topic that you'd like us to cover on one of the shows, that's right, we'll get out our sheets and we'll cover them. Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests. Complete that form. We review those suggestions actually more on a weekly basis now, and we'll reach out once they have been reviewed. On to the stories for the week. Woohoo! I don't know why, but I'm thinking about Pythonizing Nmap because this relates to my previous technical segments. This one's interesting as it combines both Python subprocess and Schlex, the shell library for running external operating system commands in Python. Lots of code examples. This was actually an article from Offensive Security, but when I clicked the link in my show notes, it was to their GitHub, which essentially has the same information. So you're all good there. But I think it highlights a really interesting point that many of us have been in, where you want to run Nmap, but you want to run it on your own terms, right? You want to run it programmatically, and you want to be able to manipulate programmatically the input and the output. I thought it did a good job. It certainly gave me some ideas to enhance, perhaps, my own project, which uses a Python library to do it. But we also run into those situations where, like, do I use someone else's library? Or do I create my own kind of thing? And, depends on your requirements and, how much time you want to invest in it, certainly. So it's really cool. Good stuff. Putting it into a SQLite database, all kinds of fun stuff in there.
Nice.
Thought it was good. Where's Joff? Where's Joff been?
I don't know. Yeah, he couldn't make it tonight just because we shifted back a little bit earlier, and because normally he's the makes it for the news at 8, and
we'll be done by then.
Yep,
maybe. What else we got this week?
I thought your unboxing Busybox was pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
Given that Busybox is pretty much ubiquitous under Linux-based distros or Linux-based firmware for tons of IoT-type devices.
Tons. I mean, it's really in pretty much every
It has been for a
firmware.
long time.
Yeah. What was kind of anticlimactic was that none of these are really like earth-shattering kind of vulnerabilities. Like, I was excited. I was like, cool. So Clarity and JFrog got together, analyzed all the Busybox source code, which I've been seeing a trend where for like commercial entities are funding essentially their own researchers to go look at open source code for security vulnerabilities, and uncovering quite a few, quite frankly. 14's a pretty high number. I don't know how much the Busybox code has been scrutinized over the years, but it'll be a long time, and perhaps never for some, before these fixes are pushed into those firmware projects and products that you mentioned, Larry. Yep. I mean, there's already a whole crapload of end-of-life firmware out there that will just never get fixed.
Yep, and even that said, if they do push it fairly quickly to firmware, how often do users update firmware? We've talked about this as a problem that we've had for years, that many users, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, type of thing. So
I mean, a lot of them are DOS vulnerabilities, and they didn't necessarily do all the work to weaponize them. There is a use after free vulnerability that they say may be exploitable for remote code execution, but they didn't create it. But they're also saying it's quite rare to have that condition where it's inherently unsafe to process an awk pattern from external input. I mean, I'm sure that happens, but probably not in an ubiquitous manner. Certainly, although, I mean, if there is command injection, but I mean, I guess if there's command injection, do you really need a use after free vulnerability in awk? maybe to escalate privileges, but typically there aren't such privileges to escalate when you've got to come in injection. You're executing this root.
Yep, typically.
Yep. So I was excited about this, but then I was like, oh, well, it's actually not that big of a deal. But I think the bigger deal is that there are folks helping the open source community, and certainly some of these projects that have, like you said, Larry, been around for a really long time, and no one's really looked at the source code for it in that way, which I think is good, positive thing.
So open source code is being audited more and more. As it gets audited, we're finding more and more vulnerabilities. This is good, except those vulnerabilities have been there for how long?
Sometimes
is anybody tracking it back to find out how long those things have been vulnerable?
Sometimes a really long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of these bugs are esoteric and not just one bug. They're chained together. And I think the level of scrutiny and effort it takes to find those series of bugs in open source code is significant. And not every security person or program on the planet is, one, going to take the time, and two, have the skills to be able to do that. And there's also some luck involved in it, as well.
Finding the bugs?
Being able to chain those bugs together, for code. So oftentimes what I think happens is you hit a dead end, right? Or you find one of the bugs, but that bug isn't impactful or exploitable without some other bug to enable it, whether on the front end or the back end. So, it's kind of a dead end. I mean, it's still a bug, but maybe it's not a security bug necessarily. And also, how much have we scratched the surface in the number of lines of open source code that are floating out there on the internet? Probably not a lot. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but there has to be over hundreds of millions of lines of open source code. It has to be.
Yep.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
We've done 1 billion.
Yeah. That number's huge, right? So even if you take one, let's just speculate. How many lines of code do you think exist in Busybox? Probably quite a bit, as it's incorporating code from all of the other GNU utilities. So it's pretty significant. And, they found 14. And that's still just a drop in the bucket. Drop in the bit bucket.
This goes back to software bill of materials that's becoming very popular, or becoming a big topic. I should say not extremely popular with a lot of people. And Black Duck and all those companies that are tracking open source code because of vulnerabilities, because, go back to Heartbleed type of stuff, and so on and so forth. And if you've got a chunk of open source code in your proprietary product, are you responsible for keeping it updated in your product? Is the end user responsible for keeping track of that? Is the open source project have any liability? So it's not just the security issues, there's also the liability issues, the updating and development time and testing and everything else. It gets interesting, especially since most code these days, most applications aren't coded. They're Lego.
Lego blocks built together, right? But then if you forked any one of those libraries, now you get a whole different set of it. Now you've got to do your own, not just disclosure, because you forked it just for yourself, right? But now you've got to do your own testing and integration of that patch and your own regression testing. So let's say I forked a library. Mainstream code in that library says we've got a vulnerability, but I've changed that code in my fork of it, so I can't just take that patch and apply it. I've got to go retrofit that into my code, and you have to do that for everyone that has forked that particular project.
Well, let me ask you a question, Tyler, or anybody. Has anybody stuck Kali in production anywhere and left it there?
Not Kali specifically.
Okay, why? Why not?
I think it's more of an offensive tool.
Having tools available to a hacker is not a great idea. If I seen Kali, I would definitely try to gain access to that so I could utilize the tools in the environment without flagging anything, because that's going to have some exclusions set up. So not a great idea.
My point is more along the lines of they don't have a real security team building patches for it. They do.
It's all Debian-based and open source tools, right? It's a Debian-based OS that's running right off of Debian branch, but the tools that it uses and sticks in its repo, those are all open source, and
I wonder how much do they customize any of those tools?
A little bit, but they mostly do. And don't get me wrong, I'm not in no way, shape, or form impugning them. They do an amazing job, but they customize the tools a little bit, but mostly to fit inside the framework that is the distro. They also customize the distro a little bit so that tools will all work together. And but I mean, so contrary-wise, would you take Pen2 and leave it running in production?
No, I kind of liken that to leaving a loaded gun inside your facility. Kind of. Well,
you can. The point is that Pen2 is an overlay on top of Gen2. It's actually got all the security patches of Gen2. Kali
also
does not have all the security
Kali
patches.
is Debian.
Nope.
Kali has all the security patches that Debian pushes out. It runs right off the branch of Debian.
They've done a lot better recently, and are they all the way up to date? Yeah. They used to not be, so I don't know.
Yeah, but Debian's still a backported distro, which inherently runs its own risks. Back to regression testing as well. In other words, the latest. I wasn't really trying to use
a hacking distro, but it was just there was the convenient ones we all know.
But what scares me is the backporting thing, and it's been a while since we've talked about it, right? But let's say the latest version of the software is version 4.0, and you've got 3.0 in your distro, right? The fix for security and other things came out in 4.0. What Debian will do is just take that security patch in the 4.0 branch and apply it to the 3.0 branch. But you haven't taken all of those other changes, which could impact the viability of the fix. And that's actually happened. That's actually bit them in the past, which is interesting. So it begs the notion that one flaw in something like Busybox or some open source code doesn't need to be fixed once. It needs to be fixed multiple times, compounding the problem.
If you've forked, if you've modified, if you've changed.
Right. If you're backporting.
This is a problem.
Yeah, that's a problem.
So then you've got code all over the place in God knows how many products that could need a teensy little bit of updating.
Yes, some retrofitting to make sure that patch actually... I mean, did I have a story about that? Yeah, I had a story where the patches didn't really fix it. It was my story number 18, CVE 2021-40539, Manage Engine AD Self-Service Plus, which is Manage Engine makes software to manage your Active Directory environment, and it allows you to do stuff in AD, like control AD. I thought I had a better description of...
Effectively,
you can do self-service for password resets. You can manage, depending on which level of access you have. It's got a bunch of extended management features for Active Directory schema integrations. So any of it's basically a web portal that allows you to interact with AD at the user and admin level. That being said, there's some interesting hooks. It requires extended permissions to run, and these guys were able to do remote code injection via remote code execution over a REST API through, I think, it was some kind of a JSON form where there was an arbitrary file upload on the API.
Yeah, so
we were looking at this code for a while.
Yeah, Manage Engine software is basically a giant glob of Java software. For implements a REST API
for interacting with your Active Directory with elevated permissions. What could possibly
go wrong in this scenario? We just described it really need to we say any more why it went wrong. But what's interesting is that the public analysis was really focused around a particular exploit or a vulnerability associated exploit. They found that there's a Java class upload. So you can upload your own Java class into the software, essentially take control or execute code in the context of the software is how we would read that. And so they found many more vulnerabilities that weren't in the patched version. So the patch didn't really fix all of the issues.
Right. Well, when you can upload your own classes that run in the context of the application,
you're basically just that application at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah, I read the article and it went from really, really bad to really worse. You get authentication bypass. So you're oh, that's cool, authentication bypass. Right. All right. Then you got file upload, and then you end up with remote code or argument injection, and then remote code execution, and you tie it all and chain it all together. You basically can pop a full arbitrary uploaded binary directly from an API, a REST API.
Which
it's not a good thing.
And as we established, the AD self-service essentially allows you to control Active Directory.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is one that CISA reported is actively being exploited. So
yeah,
like that means that this is exposed probably to the internet in some cases, which also like is terrifying, but not uncommon.
Yeah, not surprising. Terrifying, but not surprising.
Yeah, the patch only fixes the path traversal issue. Obviously, that was just scratching the surface.
Yep. Paul, real quick, one I wanted to hit, just kind of a fun one. My number 4, a post to the full disclosure mailing list, which I tend to not follow up on a lot lately. I
haven't read that.
But like, it was still in my RSS feed, and this one, like, just for whatever reason, the title jumped out at me, which was the Knights of 9X.
Is that like the King of 9X?
Well, yeah, something like that.
Is that like a hacker's reference? There was
9X used to be the phone service
New
here
York,
in New England.
New York exchange.
Yep, New York, New England.
But
exchange.
There was a member of the Masters of Deception. It was called like the King of 9X or something like that. The character in Hackers is like paying homage to, basically.
Yeah. So this one was like it. I'm like, all right, I got to click on this 9X because that's local to us, the New York New England exchange, and like this is an old school type of thing, and yeah, it is totally like an old school like 0-day release.
With ASCII art.
With ASCII art, and the description is
like sword ASCII art.
And skull, and like
leet speak, like holy leet speak, Batman.
For the lulls. Remember, kids, do it for the lulls. And if you scroll, and I want to get to the actual code, but
it's so nostalgic right now.
And down in the bottom, like the greets to like Crash Override, Zero Cool, Lord Nikon, Serial Killer, all those types of things.
Two Blade Razor Joey.
Yep. Respect to LOD, Gobbles, Woo Woo, CDC, Frack, and all sorts of others. And the middle fingers to all the charlatan Nazis, incels, and ill-mob losers. Like, ooh.
Wow.
Ooh, wait,
like,
where was this from?
Wow.
This was a full... was this, 2001?
No, this was last week. Like, yeah, November 4th, 2021. But still, the code is like, holy crap. It's written in Python 3 with requests and sys as the two main libraries they call.
Yep.
And it's basically a Python wrapper around calling some system commands and creating some web requests. Like, this is not mind-blowing type of stuff. But the effectiveness here is that they're using it to call a remote netcat listener, to create a remote netcat listener through some PHP forms for a piece of software called Kingfish 3, which is a super lame piece of phishing PHP so that it looks like the Instagram and other sets of, like, basically some dumb fisher is taking this lame PHP and setting it up as their Instagram login page for phishing folks, and they found a way to get reverse shells on these systems by some super simple PHP parameter additions by inserting responses into the database.
They're exploiting basically a phishing kit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And inserting rows. I see add row, die like the rest. And the password is mess with the best.
Yep.
Wow. This is amazing.
This is like trolling, like an exploit that is trolling hardcore.
Yep. Like, there is more comments about printing pwned by the Knights of 9X and hack the planet than there is actual exploit code here.
You're like, I can't even get to like what's the
where's the issue?
Yeah. Like,
so it's an issue by passing parameters to either login.php or form.php, which adds instances to the database.
It looks like a SQL command injection.
Yeah, looks like it.
Yeah. Again, it's like Larry said, there's a lot of printing and stuff.
This is amazing. Like, this took a lot of work to write this.
Yep.
Just the thought behind some of the lols in here.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
That was an amazing throwback exploit. Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't help that I've been reading a lot of you and I have both been reading a lot of books about hacker history and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Very nostalgic.
Moving along.
A massive zero-day hole found in Palo Alto security appliances.
Oops.
They didn't talk much about the actual vulnerability. It looked like they were not disclosing anything. But it was bypassing validations via HTTP request smuggling and a stack-based buffer overflow that got them access to Palo Alto firewalls running PAN-OS of a specific version. They did get remote code execution on both physical and virtual firewalls. They said public exploit code does not exist at this time. Patches are available from the vendor. Is pretty much the impact. That was a big takeaway. Is again, they didn't really they didn't get into the nitty gritty of it. So going by Shodan, there are more than 70,000 vulnerable instances. This was from Randori.
Oops.
Was the company that published this just the other day. It is CVE 2021-3064. Remote code execution in Palo Alto firewalls.
That's a bad thing.
I mean, and when you reach a certain level of code...
Let's be honest, Tyler. You're going, targets.
But, I mean, I don't, fault Palo Alto, everyone that has software, especially at the scale of a Palo Alto. I mean, you're bound to have vulnerabilities.
Sure.
It looked like the coordination and the timeline was pretty tight. The Randori began on October 26th. Disclosure and patched happened, and then the report was on November 10th. So, yeah, Palo Alto took this serious. There was no hand waving or this isn't our problem or we need 90 or 120 days to fix it kind of thing. This was squashed immediately, which I think, as much as you want to believe that there's no public exploitation, the fact that it was discovered and squashed that quickly definitely limits that window, right? I think it's a great story that if you're a software vendor and you cooperate and fix crap quickly and get stuff out there, and there was no dragging their feet. We've covered how many stories about vendors dragging their feet, the hand waving, deniability, denying the whole thing, silently fixing it, Apple, and all that stuff. Palo Alto did a great job here. They're also a sponsor on the network, by the way. I should disclose that. Not that we're trying to hide that. It is public knowledge. But again, looking at the disclosure timeline, that's pretty awesome.
Alternatively, they may be a sponsor on the network, but we're still talking about exploits in their stuff.
Right.
So, on the converse.
Yeah, and it begs the question, too, how much can you find on your own versus, other people as well?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the largest software companies like Microsoft, they have teams finding their own bugs, but they've also got external, people that report bugs all the time as well. So, I don't know that you're ever going to find all your own security vulnerabilities. I think that you're going to have to work with the security community, which is one reason why the Apple thing, bugs us so much.
Yep. And I think about that, Paul, and that raises some good question. If we take Microsoft, for example, Microsoft has got these folks that are doing the security stuff on their own stuff. And admittedly, they are close to the problem. They work for Microsoft and they're auditing and they're doing Microsoft stuff. But arguably, they're separate groups, and they shouldn't be necessarily communicating all that much. But then again, they're Microsoft people doing it, trying to audit Microsoft stuff. So there's some there's some preconceived notions. There's the opportunities for folks to get down paths of, hey, I've seen this before, I've looked at this already,
right? And
maybe not having the right frame of mind and context. Why having outside folks continue to find these stuff?
It's a great point,
because
Larry.
they have a very different perspective, and they're not subject to some of those biases that they've already seen.
Right. I mean, there could be methodology like, hey, we're the internal Microsoft, and I'm not saying this is necessarily the case, and I'm not picking on Microsoft,
right?
Although I will in an upcoming story, but still, you're going to look at if you work for Microsoft as an example, and you're looking for bugs, like, oh, we have this process, we ran through this process, we didn't have any bugs, so we're probably good. But an external researcher is going to look at it a completely different way.
Yeah,
and maybe that's how they found the bug.
Yep, and not have any other
not
biases
to say
they might have already had.
Like way is flawed in any.
Right.
I mean, it's just different.
It's different.
Yeah.
Right. And what's that other saying? Many hands make light work.
Yeah. For sure.
Many hands find lots of exploits.
They did. There was a group that found. Where is it?
Found that my glass needs more ice.
Cisco and Larry's glass needs more ice. But there was a Microsoft one that I thought I read this week that I thought I wrote up. Not the Linux one, not the NPM one. Maybe I forgot to add it. But there was one where Microsoft, the Azure Sphere.
Oh, yeah, no, it's here. Cisco Telus finds 10 vulnerabilities. Your story number 10.
Oh, because it started with Cisco. I thought that was the Cisco one. Yeah, so Telus finds 10 vulnerabilities in Azure Sphere, Linux kernel, which is their entire ecosystem for having secure IoT devices. And not all of them, excuse me, were recognized by Microsoft. So some of the findings in the Talos specific vulnerability nomenclature, Microsoft believes the approach described is implemented by design and does not present a security risk to customer production environments. Therefore, it's not a security bug, it's a feature. Which, I mean, you could debate. This had something to do with something about the validation of the boot sequence, which is what I thought Azure Sphere was all about, right? Using that kind of TPM model to validate the bootloader. So security monitoring, firmware downgrade vulnerability. So this is a way to exploit the archiving, the ability to move between different versions of firmware, exploiting that to downgrade the firmware, which sounded to me like a vulnerability that needs to be addressed, but so tied to the Azure Sphere architecture that they probably can't fix it without redoing the architecture. And I don't know how feasible it is to pull off this style of attack, but certainly I look at firmware downgrading in general as a pretty severe class of attack. Because, I mean, as all of us know, previous version of firmware has some glorious vulnerability, right? And you've done your due diligence by patching your firmware, except as an attacker, I'm just going to put you back on the vulnerable firmware.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Telus is doing great work.
Absolutely.
By the way.
And they have for a long time.
Yep.
Long time. Yeah, one of the things that I find kind of interesting here was that the two of their issues, one of them was a denial of service for their security monitor. And I'm not positive what Azure Sphere security monitor does, but I can make some pretty good educated guesses.
Yeah.
And denying service to that might be a problem.
And they do say on the firmware downgrading that this vulnerability is theoretical and was discovered in development mode, but has not been confirmed in pre-production or production environments.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, so
they have a chance to fix it before it makes it into a customer's hands.
Because it's not Microsoft's MO today much to be like this isn't a security vulnerability, and they do say that, and oftentimes you can kind of see their side of it too. To be honest with you, unlike Apple, which is there are no security vulnerabilities here.
These are not the security vulnerabilities.
These are not the ones you're looking for. What security vulnerability?
Ice.
Where? What? We fixed
not
that.
looking.
We didn't.
I'm not looking at the stories, but did you guys have the VMware issue in the stories?
What VMware issue?
That it doesn't run on an M1 or M2 Mac?
No, killing it. As soon as the M1 came out, I was
they put out Fusion for that.
Yeah,
the new version of Fusion is Arch 64.
Yeah, but Fusion will run on it, but it will not emulate Intel-based VMs.
No way, I didn't know that.
Yep, only
because
ARM.
M1 is a different instruction set of ARM. It's a different ARM.
It's ARM.
It's ARM, but is the instruction set specific to the M1 chip?
I don't think so.
That's a great question. I wish I had I wish I was prepared for this.
The big one is that VMware with Fusion has said that there is no market for them to emulate Intel x86 virtual machines on ARM on M1 or M2 hardware.
Right. So
there is no business model for them to achieve that because the people that would buy that
your
would
OS
be so little.
has to be ARM. So even if your OS
your
is
base
ARM,
OS has to be OS.
Your base OS has to be ARM.
So that means you need to use Windows.
But what's the market for that? What's the market for being on ARM and wanting to emulate an ARM operating system?
Well, I
guess, but
you could do that with Linux. I mean, you're doing ARM-based Linux for that, so that's not a problem.
I think
but
I just did
Windows,
that. I did that today with MIPS. In my
Windows,
example,
on the other hand, Windows 10 for ARM hasn't been officially released.
Yep.
And Windows 11 is still kind of new, but Windows 11 for ARM exists. But
you want to run Linux VMs on your Mac.
Yeah,
right.
But I want to run existing Linux VMs, and I want to run existing Windows VMs on my Mac, and I can't do that.
Right. You want to test, you want to hack, you want to play with, you want to learn from.
You want to do exploit development.
Yep.
On Windows.
For x86.
For x86, you can't do it on a Mac now.
This is why
I'm a creator.
This is why I.
Sorry.
Yep.
What's that, Tyler?
Not a creator.
Said you're not a creator. You're not in their ecosystem anymore.
Yeah, no, you're not. You're
dog shit now, basically. And this is what I predicted.
So what it is you are a power user, and Apple for the last 5 or 10 years has been walking away from their power user community. And I mean, you're a power user in a very specific subset, which is a information security development InfoSec power user. But their power user market, they started taking root away from you. They started taking, they're like, okay, we're all about the iOS. We're not about the Mac OS. Have a nice day.
I see the InfoSec community largely leaving the app, and I made this prediction when the M1 came out, leaving the Apple ecosystem and going to Windows and or Linux.
Yep.
And I think Windows is probably, because people aren't as stupid as I am to go all Linux, but I think specifically Windows, because WSL and specifically version 2 is really, really good. In fact, that's the exact move Joff made. Joff's like, I'm done with Apple and its bullshit. That's where I see it going.
Interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. So how many, I know, didn't Hacks for Pancakes sent hers back? She said all of her forensics tools didn't run on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
She's like, she immediately sent it back.
Yep. Yeah, Tyler, would be interesting to know that, you made that call that, hey, I see security professionals moving away from Apple, given that they've made that switch to the M1 and now the M2. Yep. In Guardians, who has been Apple since
for a long time.
Since 2003.
Yep.
Will be transitioned by end of year.
Yep.
Away
from Linux or Windows or just like a...
Yep.
Yeah, both. Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. We may still have a Mac to be able to do, desktop publishing and, report writing and that type of stuff, but
any examination or testing or whatever, you'll have a lab with them, but
everything
you won't
else
be
will
issuing them to the employees.
Yep. Everything else will be on separate hardware using any of the other technologies.
Right.
And virtualization. Yep.
I will say, and I've been having these conversations this week quite a bit, as I debug some of the issues on my AMD-based Linux system, like don't go the Linux route on AMD, because I think a lot of people I've talked to in my own experience, the Linux kernel and drivers and like IO control and things like that is not as refined as it is in Intel. So I get like weird, like my audio devices will just go away like randomly. And like if you dig into it like I have, like that's an IO control kind of thing that just hasn't been refined in that Linux kernel. And my other two Linux systems are Intel based and I don't have issues like that. So I highly recommend that if you're now we're talking about making the switch, which is a commercial from long ago, right? If you're making the switch, AMD is got some advantages. Like I can get a 24 core processor with 256 gigs of RAM for a pretty reasonable price. And you can get to 256 gigs of RAM on AMD. Intel, you pretty much have to go Xeon to get above the 128. And so that's why I went AMD, but there's issues. there's issues. It's open source.
Yep.
So word of warning. But I mean,
so I'm actually looking.
If I can run VM, VMs are fine. On my AMD, I mean, I can spin up like with 256 gigs of RAM and 24. I mean, I can spin up VM after VM after VM. But the instance I have to do a Zoom or a Teams call, like randomly, no audio hardware devices exist. And it's random. It's totally random.
And technically, because it's AMD, it's not Thunderbolt 4. Mm-hmm. So if it's a laptop that you're using it on, there can be issues.
It's a desktop, but there's issues there.
Well, I mean, if a desktop or laptop, if it's not a server machine, very rarely would Thunderbolt 4 matter on a server machine. But if it's on a workstation, whether it's a desktop or a laptop, Thunderbolt 4 might matter if you're using a fast hard drive for media, if you're a creator. Or one of those types of instances.
And I also think if like you're looking into like non-Apple hardware now because you're frustrated like Larry and a lot of other people, we did
that's a different issue for Larry. Let's be clear. His frustration is from other problems.
Yes,
definitely.
That too.
Definitely.
But we did in the latest build, we did a PC M.2 that uses PCIe version 4. So you get to that 7,000 megabits a second read and write on your M.2. And like if you're building a system now, it's because it's not that much more expensive. You just got to make sure your hardware components match up. I highly recommend that.
Yeah,
Johnny plugs a USB drive. Laptop. Right? You plug a USB drive into that, and it's pinned at 400 megabits a second because that's the fastest it can read off of the drive.
USB,
plugged. Like, none of the other USB buses or other buses are getting in the way. Like, and that is a huge, if you're doing stuff that has some I/O to it, which many of us do, that's a huge bottleneck you can remove from those systems. Also, having a 3090, RTX 3090 really helps as well. We got one. And apparently you can mine a lot of cryptocurrency on it as well.
Should we go political and talk about NSO group and another ban? Like, I'm curious what everybody thinks about trade bans and the actual political side of
like I'll get geopolitical. Like,
does this help?
Yeah, like when I read this article, I was like, what does this do to our relationships with Israel? Because like, I love all my Israeli people. And
you don't want to piss Israel off.
No. But not only that, like I feel like we got good relations, and this is like soiling the relations with it. Like I understand the other side of it too, but like my brain immediately went to like we need to be really close partners with Israel, keep them as our friends, and protect each other. Right? Like that's not, and especially doing what we do in cybersecurity, like very much that. And this has a potential. So what happened was. And I had a quote from it in the article that I thought summarized it pretty nicely. U.S. bans trade with firms. So the Commerce Department added NSO to its entity list, which effectively bans trade with the firm, prevents American companies from doing business with NSO unless they receive explicit permission. The article kind of goes on to explain like, no one's going to give explicit permission. Like that's basically like a political thing. Like no one's getting permission to do business with the NSO group because they made the Pegasus software and sold that to quote authoritarian governments and tracking activist journalists. And we've covered some of the stuff that has happened.
Now, admittedly, this is we Tyler mentioned, let's bring up the politics, and sure, allied with Israel, we back a lot of the things that they do, but there's also some things that we don't necessarily agree with, and this is an opportunity for us to sort of, arguably, this is not the Israeli government that we're putting a ban on. It's an individual company that has made decisions to do those types of things. But then again, are they sponsored by?
I would say they're in cahoots, Larry. In cahoots.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Are we using NSO? Like, that's the other thing. Like, is there license language that allows our government to leverage tools outside of Pegasus? Because
I would say, of course, we are. Right?
And that's where that explicit permission comes in. Right?
It bans American companies. I'd argue the U.S. government is not an American company, and we're using the Pegasus software. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is, like, you think about something like Cobalt Strike. Like, there's export laws on Cobalt Strike, but like it's used by criminals as a means for ransomware deployment, but we're not banning anything by their companies because those are hacked versions. So how do we legitimize and know that these are valid uses of NSO? I know there's some IOCs that they claim call back specifically to the servers inside of NSO's network, but there's also ways around some of that. So I'm really curious, like, what our level of attribution and our confidence behind trying to do something like this when it's not going to stop the people that need to be stopped.
Well, apparently there's controls in the software too that, like, when NSO licenses it to someone else, they can't use it to implant on any phone number that's in Israel. I don't know how true that is. Like, I got nothing to.
In Israel, though. So that was the other thing. I was reading through the code on that, and like how they said that it blocked Israeli area codes.
Yes.
The active exploitation and the IOCs within inside of the tool. In fact, I just used this tool. I have a client I'm working with that was targeted by this stuff, and looking through the IOCs and running these tools against each of these devices, like, it takes a little bit of time, and some of this stuff, like, can get very hairy about how they're jumping through different proxies and then ending up at certain domains. So I'm hesitant to see why we're putting such a crunch on, a tool that is leveraged. Yeah, it's offensive, but that is also used for some good things that is well known. So, journalists, it made the news because it's journalists. They cry when they're targeted. I get it. We don't want to target journalists, but Amnesty International, like, putting out a tool, which is a great tool. Like, we should develop some more Styx IOCs for malware on phones, but there seems like there's better places to focus, the atrocities that we're focusing on from a journalist standpoint, rather than crying wolf in your own sounding arena. But that's just me.
You're not wrong, Tyler. There's probably bigger problems to solve and better ways to solve it.
Yeah,
but I think when you target journalists, though, you're going to get that spotlight. It just inherently, because they're journalists, right? And then it kind of makes you wonder, well, if journalists are being targeted, like, who else has been targeted? And that never bubbles to the surface because they're not journalists. There's other entities and people being targeted that we're not hearing about.
Yeah, this is used for legitimate targeting of, domestic international terrorists that Israel is coming against. Like, the Israeli government uses this, and the targets that they're looking at, there's usually a reason that they're looking at it. Yeah, like, they come down pretty heavy-handed in some cases, but they usually have pretty good reason to, because people are trying to kill them all the time. And if it's, a journalist that is multinational that is trafficking data to terrorists, then it targeted a journalist, but they were doing shit they probably shouldn't have. So
Ira Winkler went on Malicious Life and had this to say on this issue, and you can go listen to the interview. I thought it was a good interview. And, they were kind of pressing Ira on this issue of spying, right? Like, basically, Ira worked for NSA, and they were kind of pushing, like, well, NSA spies on people. Like, isn't that a violation of people's privacy? And, Ira brought up, I thought, like, the other side of the argument really well, and whether you agree with it or not, and then I think it depends on the context. And he said, historically, when something bad happens, terrorist bombings, what have you, we go, well, why didn't we know about this? Why didn't we have the intelligence? But then when we see that it might be abused, we go, well, that's an atrocity. And, like, what do you want? Do you want not to spy on people, or do you want to spy on people so that bad things don't happen? And how do you balance that between the two, right? You can't have both. I mean, I think the U.S. has done a good job over time. I mean, maybe at certain points, not a great job, and it was corrected, right, of providing that balance. And you can believe what you want about the FISA courts and what have you, but I think the U.S. has made an admirable effort to put some checks and balances in place so that you can't just go spy on anyone, right? There has to be an audit trail of record. And sure, that's been abused, as many things have been abused, but that process kind of it corrects itself because of the checks and balances.
It's iterative.
Again, you can believe it's iterative. You're right. Like, at certain points in time, people have done some heinous shit. But hopefully that's come to light, and we've adjusted our processes to prevent that, but still provide the protection for the nation and for people.
It's always risk reward and balance. Like, it will always be tilted in one way or another from balance of power. That's government shows that, power shows that, like local law enforcement shows that. But like, do you want to blow up? Do you want your towers to blow up? Like, do you want to be protected? Do you want to win a war? Do you want Americans not to die? Then like you give up certain things to have some of the freedoms that you have. And people don't like to come to terms with the dirty side of what it takes to actually maintain global power and maintain a free nation that is independent of, you know.
Well, but I think they'd argue, is it a free nation if our privacy is violated in the name of national security? And that's the argument. And be honest with you, I don't think it's a bad argument either. I don't think we should have to give up.
Would you rather it the other way around? Like, would you rather live in a place where you have the potential to get blown up on an airplane? Or would you like to take your damn shoes off and put your laptop in a bin to maybe combat that 1%? Like, some things
that's where it gets to, like, can they look at my laptop when I come through the border, right? Because then it becomes really tricky issues where I can certainly see both sides of it.
Oh yeah, I see both sides. It's just what freedoms and what do you want to give up for more or less protection? Like it's always
in a perfect world, freedom.
Perfect
world, freedom wouldn't come at a cost to any of your privacy, right? But that's a more delicate issue than just that kind of binary 0 and 1 kind of thing, right? Like freedom or privacy. Like it's not that. There's again.
Well, I think Israel walks that line a little bit closer to the, you know, we have to protect our people and we have to protect our borders and we have to be a little bit more, like Mossad's got a name for a reason. They have to be a little bit more ruthless because of the threat against them and to maintain that security. Like, it looks bad to us because we're a lot bigger nation. We don't have those consistent threats like Canada and Mexico. I mean, big threats. So we have to like sometimes understand the mindset of why they go to some of the levels they go to look at and, you know, ensure that they're not getting bombed, because they have an Iron Dome that reacts in seconds to missile launches. That's something we don't worry about. So you know, you have to take some of that American mindset out of the conceptual pieces of what you're evaluating for privacy and security and where that fits.
And speaking
Tyler, you're such a realist. Come on.
Josh, did you want to weigh in? I mean, it's such a light topic. Like, I want your thoughts on privacy versus freedom. We could do a whole show on this. Right?
You've got a real interesting question here. You've got the question of where does the limit stand? And if you want to talk country by country, Tyler, as you started that discussion, you know, American mindset is incredibly different. Not only just the threats, you know, in Israel, they've got the Iron Dome because of the missiles, but because we've got Second Amendment rights. So we have these rights to self-defense. And, you know, very rarely do you talk about hackback or whatever it is, active defense. It's hilarious. In other countries, you know, they're just like defend and just ignore it, you know. We have a different mindset. And also there's the privacy aspect. You know, we believe privacy is implicit in our system of laws. And whether you believe there's an explicit right to privacy in the Constitution or the laws or not, we all believe that privacy is very important. And so these types of tools are horrific in one sense and incredibly useful in another. And actually, we had this exact discussion in our earlier segment, our interview segment with Ladrina and Martine. And we talked about privacy. Stalkerware is exactly the type of tools, to a certain extent, that we're talking about. So and we looked for use cases, and we're like, there are use cases, but you know, where do they go?
I think there was some violations, but I think there were some violations of people's privacy and people's rights. Specifically with the Patriot Act and a lot of the things that Snowden leaked. But the other thing you got to keep in mind, the Snowden leaks is it leaked a lot of foreign intelligence as well. And I think it was General Michael Hayden, right, that said it set back a lot of programs by 5 to 10 years. And it's like that wasn't stuff that was exposing privacy violations against American citizens. That was exposing some of the operations that were happening on intelligence gathering on other nations for the protection of our own nation, for our national security.
Yeah, and did anything change? Did we actually get more privacy? Did we become more cognizant now the government doesn't spy more?
Yeah, there were a lot of changes. That was covered in one of the books I read. It was, I think, Kaplan's book, the one that talked about the pit for the first time in the book. What was that one called? Crap, it's on one of my
Where's
slides.
Jeff?
No, they burnt down programs that were in place, and they stood up new ones that took on where they were left and built new tools.
Yeah, so, but there was Obama was instrumental also in implementing changes so that the laws were changed as to how some of these programs were run. Some of them were shut down that basically yielded no intelligence that led to terrorist groups being taken down, but only existed to violate rights of U.S. citizens. So there were some corrections in there in the right direction for privacy. That has definitely happened. And again, those are one program out of how many, right?
The other question that ends up coming up when you start talking about this and offensive tools, okay, so this is a commercial company. These are commercially developed tools. If these tools are not being developed or sold commercially, there are tools out there and groups that will, if you have enough money and you pay them, they will develop these outside of commercial spaces that aren't on entity or trading lists. So does it really matter? And are you punishing the wrong groups that are the ones that are in public and selling these and trying to do the right thing, maybe not always getting it right? But if you want, you can go pay someone out of the books to go do the exact same thing with a tool that does more capabilities. That's not going to end up on one of those lists.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, the ban hammer doesn't work, right? I mean, we tried to ban crypto. That obviously didn't work. So
Germany tried banning offensive and hack tools. That doesn't work.
Oh, the Wassenaar Accords. Yeah. and
it doesn't.
I mean,
it doesn't
how
change
many
the
times has privacy been infringed with Clipper chips and V chips? Was it and other stuff like that?
Yeah, that was
and HDCP. Yeah, because you're really going to do content protection in a cable. Give me a break.
Yeah, again, crime is well outside of the jurisdiction of embargoes and trade acts and lists. This is commercial and direct business. Let's try and do better. And I think maybe some of this will help them correct their business operations. But I think again we're targeting places that are not leveraging the tools that are causing the most crime. You look at ransomware. You're not going to go embargo some crypto that the ransomware is using or AES because it's used in that crypto. They're just going to develop around it. This is kind of a lost cause of effort that takes a lot of paperwork and a lot of people's hours.
On the lines of more U.S. legislation, the U.S. House has passed an act to help SMBs with cybersecurity. This obviously has a few more places to go before it becomes an actual law. However, this particular act is one thing it does is establish the Small Business Development Center Cyber Training Act. Sorry, that's the name of the act. Is a cyber counseling certification program at the small business development centers so they can better assist small businesses with their cybersecurity and cyber strategy needs. This was the one highlight from this that really resonated with me. This is it sounded to me like actual help for small businesses in cybersecurity, actual training and resources for small businesses to be secure. The other part of the act, or the other act, I believe, it might have been a separate act that was also passed through the House, is really about reporting and things like that on cybersecurity and breaches, which overall can have a positive effect as well. But I like the part that establishes a certification program with the small business development centers that will be given resources and money to apply to actual cybersecurity programs at small businesses. Yep. So to me, that's a win.
So looking at this one, I think this is a kind of interesting tact, is that this act would establish cyber counseling certification program at small business development centers.
Those are part of the SBA.
Yep, but they didn't say how many small business development centers.
You need a lot.
There would be. Agreed. Yeah. And that the small business development centers could reimburse up to $350,000 per year for employee certification costs.
Yeah, but is that per center or per business? That was unclear to me.
To me, it says
got to be per center.
It says per center, but how many centers are there going to be? And the reason why I'm asking this is because are there really good training programs for certifying folks to go help secure small businesses? Like, hey, I run a small business. I should go get the certification so that I can learn something to secure my own small business. Are there training programs out there that have...
Well, they've got $350,000 to spend on developing those programs. Yeah, Josh, I wanted to get your take on this.
Okay, so here's the kicker. Certification means nothing unless it's backed by an accredited program. Just like if you go to a college that has no accreditation, your degree means zip squat. Okay? That's why SANS worked so hard to become an accredited, effectively college with a master's program. Ray Davidson did that for them, if I remember correctly.
And others.
And others, including this dude Larry, who has a weird ass beard.
Yeah, no, I didn't help with that. I will not take credit.
I thought you did.
Nope.
But so the certification. I mean, I can say, "Oh, I'm certified," but unless you're backed as an accreditation group, and as a matter of fact, I'm working on that right now. This is why I'm like up on this. I'm working on with 3 different nonprofits to build an accreditation group for certification of data protection levels. But that's not doing the training on that. That's actually certifying that they're protecting data at various levels. So it's a different world. But I mean, the idea is I can turn around and go, well, the Josh Marpet School of Cybersecurity is certifying people that they've taken the training and they're now certified to be cyber secure, whatever the hell that means. But how many small business development centers are actually going to know like what to look for in training?
Yeah, and
there's a hell of a lot of training academies out there that are predacious. They prey on a lot of VA money.
Tons of them now.
And how many training programs out there are good? Go ahead, Tyler.
What is training actually helping, like from a small business standpoint, and like just take ransomware? If you go get some training, and I'm assuming this is like, A+ training or maybe Security Plus if you're really lucky, but that's pretty technical for a lot of these people. Like, is that going to help you secure your network? Like, most of these places don't even have full-time IT staff, much less, training for cybersecurity that's going to stop something.
So Tyler, you got to go down a level, man. You're not talking about Sec Plus or A+. You're talking about like, don't click stuff. Like,
see, and I teach security.
I teach security. Sorry?
I don't think that's going to help anybody. Like, you look at the ransomware now and like a targeted attack, like they're phishing, they're doing some decent OPSEC. Like, ransomware is going to get in and own these networks of these don't click link training. So things like this, I think back in the day, there was the DHS CISA initiative that was offering pen tests for small businesses for free or for critical assets for free. Like, that seemed like a much more valuable program where they're coming in, offering some recommendations, providing that free pen test for places that couldn't, do it themselves, which obviously has some caveats and problems with that. But there's still the ways of showing where their vulnerabilities are over trying to train someone that has no cybersecurity background to be secure. That sounds like a waste of money. Like, I'm all for training, don't get me wrong, but I don't think this is going to help.
Where's Jeff to beat the PCI drum in this conversation? Sorry,
well, okay, so Jeff's supposed to be on. His host picture is on the episode.
I know, right?
But I'm just saying. And apparently he's lurking on the Discord. So Jeff, if you're there, start, come on, speak up, dude. But no, in all seriousness, I think there's a conflation and a confusion here. Bear with me for a second. When you do security awareness training at a small business level, you don't do Sec Plus or Net Plus or A Plus even. You don't do just don't click stuff. You do, I was simplifying. You do don't click stuff, but what you do is, let me show you ways that they're going to try to get ransomware into your system. Let me show you ways that they're going to try to phish you. Let me explain what phishing is and how these things work. And what you do is you say, okay, so let's talk about what they're going to do. This is how ransomware works. And you go through a diagram of how ransomware works. I'm using ransomware as an example, but it's the most common problem, blah, blah, blah. So you go through a diagram. You're like, okay, so how are you doing backups? So in the middle of training, you're actually asking questions and giving advice. That's why good security awareness training has to be done instructor-led. Computer-based security awareness training is worthless, period, bar none, for exactly the same reasons, Tyler, that you said. I absolutely agree with you. But if you do an in-person, Zoom is fine, don't get me wrong. If you do an in-person, instructor-led security awareness training, you as part of it, you go, okay, so it's going to attack any attached backups. How are you guys backing up? Oh, well, every day we have a backup done via an attached hard drive. We've got a script that automatically drops it onto the hard drive. And then every day somebody takes that hard drive and puts it in a safe, and we've got 12 of them, 14 of them. We go through 2 weeks of them. So if a ransomware is going to happen, we can go back days and days and days and days. That's fine. It's crude.
I like that, Josh,
I'm doing this
because I think the conversation has to be had with organizations, especially small businesses, because I think that's where I'm really kind of picking on awareness and training programs that are just computer-based, because I don't think they work, right? I don't think they work well enough. I think there is some level of effectiveness, but I don't think it's effective enough. Because if it were, we'd see phishing coming down. Instead, we're seeing it going up in effectiveness. And I think a lot of the companies latch on to, I need XYZ vendor, and my employees need to go through training, and if they get the question wrong or they fail a simulation, they have to click through this training. And I think it's completely worthless, because I think it's a point in time. It's a point in time thing, and there's no conversation. To your point, I think that conversation, when I've done awareness and security training, it's that conversation that really helped change the mindset and help them be a more security focused culture at that business. Above and beyond, like so many light years ahead of just like they had to click through a simulation that was put in. We got to make it a game, and we have to do positive reinforcement, and we have to put up posters. Like, I don't think any of that shit really works, to be quite honest. Because if it did, I think we'd be in a much better place now when it comes to phishing attacks and users succumbing to security and hacking techniques. I don't think we're in any different position. In fact, I think we're worse. Also, I do think, put my Jeff hat on, PCI was really effective in helping secure the data, right? And if there could be maybe some positive reinforcement, because I think PCI is more kind of a negative reinforcement, right? Like if you're not compliant and you get breached, like there's fines. It's very much negative reinforcement. If there was maybe something more of a positive reinforcement that allowed you to get certification that could potentially help your business, that's a really difficult thing to achieve, but that may have some better success. Something with some teeth says you have to meet this minimum standard. The problem is, anytime we create a minimum standard, those of us in curmudgeon-y folks in cybersecurity tend to poke holes at it. But
and also we tend to believe that that's going to be the maximum.
Yeah. But it's kind of
minimum standard with good guidance, I think, is what's been missing. Like, Agreed. If we had really easy guides to follow that, hey, this is how you don't get ransomware. Here's the minimum standard you should reach to be compliant, and here's how you actually do that in most environments. Like some good guidance that helps people do that. There's a lot of info out there. There's just a lot of crap out there too. So getting down to what you actually need to do is a problem.
The problem, though, in small businesses is resources, especially as small businesses are strained coming out of the pandemic. It's that resource thing. Like, even if the businesses know the right thing to do, there is a hard or soft cost to doing that, and that cost right now is absorbed by the small business. So how do you incentivize that? How do you take some of that cost off their plates?
Mm-hmm. I think it'd be cool to like have some of the more advanced companies like start to sponsor some things where they can subsidize some of the equipment. Like, a small company is going to have some commodity Asus or Linksys router out of like Walmart. Like having a company that could subsidize something like a nice Meraki next-gen all-in-one firewall that has some built-in default rules for malicious sites, proxying of users, and just some general good security edge uses. Like that would probably go a long way for a small business. But I've not seen a ton of those.
You could carve that up. You could carve that. You're on something there, because I think you can carve that up by industry, right? Because you can say if you're a retail small business, if you're a restaurant small business, there's programs that can help you acquire some resources so that you're more secure.
What kind of resources are we talking about? How much is a Meraki for that? For exactly what you're talking about, Tyler? How much are they? I don't even know anymore.
Probably $1,100 with a license.
Okay, Is that a per year, or is that, just to be clear, is that per year? Is that
that's about perpetual? I think that's a 3-year license. It might be a little bit more than that, but an all-in-one device like that's got some good security controls. Yeah.
So if we take a small business and put them in the cloud, there's some O365 or Google Suite or whatever. There's some cost there, but not
E5
much.
license. Yeah.
What's that?
An E3 or an E5 license with the attack surface reduction rules, or the ATP integration of Endpoint Defender. Like, those are just a subscription in O365, so a couple $100.
And so you've got let's say $1,500 will get a 10 or 20 person company into a much higher security stance than they're at now, or with their Walmart router. I love what you put that.
But what you really need to do is subsidize the MSP program or MSSP program, or some combination of both, for small businesses.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is the Ocean model, right? Like, I worked at Ocean, and if you're a nonprofit in Rhode Island, again, I haven't worked there in a long time, but when I worked there, the premise was they started with bandwidth, right? If you're a nonprofit and you're going to go pay for internet access, why not be part of a consortium, and you pay the consortium a fee, and the consortium goes out and does the buy on everyone's behalf to get internet access, and you pay a greatly reduced rate.
Because they have better bargaining power.
And some services, right? I mean, that was my role for, a better part of a year, was I would go out and go, oh, you need security. Like, since you're part of Ocean and you're buying, internet through us, like, we'll help you with some security things. We'll help you with some storage things. We'll help you with some backup things, right? And so you can start to subsidize other programs around it. I think it's a really great model for not just colleges and universities, but municipalities and small businesses in these industry verticals. And I really think that has some legs. Solving the world's problems right here on Paul Security Week.
I love it. This is the thought experiments that think tanks get paid a lot of money to do, and we're doing it for free right here on air, live.
Right. I think
so. For small businesses, there's 30.7 million small businesses in the U.S. Let's just call it 30 million. So let's see.
I like the DevOps approach, though, breaking that work up into smaller chunks, right? And I think small businesses can be put in certain verticals in categories. And so maybe you've got in Rhode Island, there's a restaurant every 10 feet in Rhode Island, right? Less now after the pandemic, unfortunately. But if you can create a consortium for them, so they can go buy maybe some POS software, and that they're through an MSSP, has some security controls around it, right? There's maybe a networking buy, maybe you've got some options, right? And it's bought through a centralized kind of program.
Your cost and risk profile or threat profile is different based on vertical and what you're selling. A restaurant's going to have a much lower threat profile than a 10-person shop that's providing the chips to a DoD vendor.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, oh God, don't. Okay, so they're talking on CMMC and in the Discord. So now you're bringing up DoD, so we have to talk about that for a second. CMMC tried to get their entire supply chain, all 300,000 defense industrial base contractors, going through a program which had 5 levels of security. If you were mowing a lawn, you're level 1. If you're a big, huge defense contractor, you're level 5. And there were various levels of controls that you had to meet to be a DoD contractor at those levels. They just the other day, literally last week, turned out CMMC 2.0, which destroyed most of those levels and most of those controls, and brought it back to only the top few, maybe a few thousand contractors, maybe a few tens of thousands of contractors. We still haven't determined that yet. It's still unclear. Will actually be certified, assessed, and have to be at those levels. Everybody else, it's going to be self-assessment, self-certification, self-attestation, which normally means they're not going to do it because it's an added cost. And that's the kicker. For years, since 2018, December 31st, 2018, all DoD contractors were supposed to be compliant with NIST 800-171. My personal belief is that about a single percentage, single-digit percentages of those defense contractors were actually compliant. But they're defense contractors.
Yeah, but you can. But I think compliance is a great model for things like the U.S. government, right? And that doesn't necessarily translate to private industry in the open and free market. And so you need a slightly different model. And I'm not saying CMMC is the wrong model. I think it is the right model when you talk about U.S. government and programs and compliance and contractors, because you can control it because it's controlled by the U.S. government. But when you get a free market like a whole bunch of restaurants, holding them to a standard is a different ball of wax. They need a slightly different solution for it. But I think the models are out there to support it, because I don't think SMBs are going to self-opt in to be the most secure companies unless it helps their profit margin, right? I mean, and small business, it's hard. Running a small business is freaking hard.
Or unless there's some federal regulation requiring them to do so, like
or
PCI.
some incentive or some kind of grant program too, right? That gives them more resources.
Paul, what do you know about running a small business? You've only run big media conglomerates. Come on.
Right. Most small businesses fail. So that's what everyone says when you go create a small business. Kind of warn you. At least if you got good friends, they warn you that, right?
That just means they're not persistent enough.
That's true. There is a level of persistence.
Enough.
Yeah. But again, when you're first starting any business, in the beginning it's small, right? Your profit margins you live and die by those. And you go into those organizations saying you're going to spend more money so you meet this minimum level of security standard is not going to be enough. It's not. There needs to be some other programs and incentives to help those small businesses still compete in the free market and flourish, or live by the sword, die by the sword in the free market, but have the resources available to have some security. I think this legislation is also steps in the right direction. Don't get me wrong. I think having these bills,
it's awareness, right?
That are going through Congress is a very, very positive thing.
Yeah. I think that's important, that they're addressing the fact that there are cybersecurity issues. Mm-hmm. Small, medium business is a problem, and we're trying to figure out how to fix that. Now, their intent might be the wrong direction, but hey, it's getting awareness, which is good. We need like nonprofit groups of conglomerate hackers that have too much time on their hands that want to donate something back to the community, and we can just all fix small business. I don't know.
I want to transition back to a couple more vulnerabilities and exploits, and then some silly stories. The remote code execution vulnerability in the Linux kernel's TIPC module. TIPC, from what I read, was a communications and data transfer protocol for clustering kind of systems. So certainly not like a default thing like sudo that's on every single system. So in that sense, it fits with the theme. A lot of the vulnerabilities we talked about in this show. I think that's why we weren't so charged about talking about Busybox and some of these other things. And Managed Engine might be an exception, but because it really it's not in every single Linux kernel, right? Because it's not the kind of standard norm. However, they did identify remotely exploitable vulnerabilities in TIPC. I think it's an interesting read, certainly. I mean, I'm a Linux nerd, so I kind of dig this kind of stuff. So this isn't the default thing, something you have to configure, but certainly is out there in the wild and can be exploited. And it was Sentinel-1 that discovered and disclosed this vulnerability. Again, a commercial company disclosing vulnerabilities in open source software, which is a trend that I applaud. Whether or not this is widely deployed in Linux kernels or not, I think is irrelevant. The fact that we're finding and disclosing these bugs and fixing them, most importantly. Linus has been pretty good about fixing them lately too, which I think is a good thing.
Does the Darwin, the macOS, whichever kernel, have TIPC?
No,
because it might explain some of their behavior.
So.
It might explain some of their behavior after they've used brew too many times with some of these vulnerabilities.
They got a little tipsy.
Yeah. See, that was a dad joke. That was a little bit of a stretch for a dad joke.
Out of the database.
Yeah.
And
like
stolen
the
video
deep dark
cards are not
depths.
a laughing story, by the way. Like I know you mentioned they were laughing stories. Stolen video cards aren't funny.
No, it's not funny at all. We can hit that. There's a couple other. So let's hit that one really quick. So. Don't go read articles about what's happening in California on the dock workers. And I don't know who to believe either. And I don't know if it's
what
every
story
single.
Is this?
So I just my story number 16, and I just want to preface it with that. I've read other articles that I didn't link here that are talking about the container ships that are off the coast of California,
out for miles,
right? And then how we're all going to have to go swim in the ocean and go retrieve our Christmas gifts.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of factors at work there. And again, like, I don't think I'm getting all the facts because, like, I hear it's the container ship docking points and the unions that are involved with that are doing some heinous things. I've read some things where they're like taking 2-hour lunches and like not loading any containers.
And that they don't have tractor trailer trucks to load the containers onto.
Then there's a shortage of the containers. There's a shortage of the trucks that load the containers. There's the California law that I can't remember the exact title, but there's a California law that was basically passed because, you know, everyone was working as a contractor for places like Uber and Lyft, and California felt it was unfair the way they were treated. Amazon's thrown in that mix too. They were treated unfairly, so they passed laws that said they have to be employees, and you have to give them benefits, which affected the whole economy that's happening in California. So, but like all these container ships off the coast of California are affecting the global economy, because none of this stuff can be moved. Then you got Florida like waving the flag going, hey, like, come here, like, you can offload all your crap here. But, you know, then the ships have to obviously get there. There's a cost involved with that.
Yep, there's a cost involved, and it's going to take a couple of days for them to get there. Like,
and they got to go through the Panama Canal,
right?
Which do you have to pay? I'm assuming through the articles I read, it would read between the lines. You got to pay to do that, right? Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. But then this story is like, once stuff is offloaded, if you know that container is filled with GPUs and they're selling at 50+% of their retail value, that's a very valuable load.
That's a lucrative
heist.
Yeah.
And someone wiped out an entire container. Now the thing was interesting is that whoever made the cards, right? Because like the manufacturers like MSI and others, right, can make the graphics cards, right? And whoever it was that happened to own all the product on that container ship knows the serial numbers of what was on that container ship. So if you try and register with that serial number for a warranty, they're going to know that you have a stolen card and someone's going to come talk to you about that. But I guarantee you, criminals that are acquiring these cards on the black market now are not going to register for the warranty, and it's going to some crypto mining farm somewhere, or, you know, maybe some kid's gaming PC for Christmas or something. Who knows? But in any case, I thought it is not funny, Tyler. We waited in 5. So Best Buy had a thing, and they were selling a whole bunch of cards, and you had to wait in a virtual queue. And so there were 2 factors. Like, you had to get in line in a virtual queue, and you had to be in physical proximity to a store that had that card. So you could wait in a line, like I did multiple times. You wait in a line, and it would say either like, this is sold out, there's no more left for you, like that line didn't work out for you, or like you waited in line and you could have bought a card, except there was no store within 100 miles where you could go buy the card because you had to physically go to the store to get it. So 5 virtual queues across 2 people, we waited in lines, and we ended up getting the most expensive card. It's like a $2,500 24 gig of DDR6 RAM RTX 3090. And we process video 22 times faster than we did before. So it's great business justification for that. But it doesn't help that now an entire container has been wiped out. That's not helping the issue, which sucks.
No.
Also, what sucks, hard-coded SSH keys in Cisco Policy Suite. Apparently, like, it was, I don't know if it was the same key, like same private key that was recycled across all of these instances, and you had to change your private key, and to change your private key, you had to follow the manual and manually update your key so that it was different from the default install. It's kind of the way I read that, although that may not be 100% accurate.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I read that, too.
Is that the way you read it, too? Okay,
yeah, especially given that it was a CVSS score of 9.8. That would kind of lead me to believe that it was the same default key across all the devices.
Which is, Cisco shouldn't do that. That's bad.
Yeah, they should know better than that.
Also, there was, that was bad enough in and of itself. However, there were vulnerabilities in the management interfaces that affected the passive optical network switches and the ONTs, optical network terminals.
either way.
They said optical network terminal, but
okay, yeah.
Terminator is essentially what it takes the fiber and converts it to Ethernet. That's exactly what it does,
or
right?
To some other delivery method,
or some other physical mechanism, right? So like we have an ONT here in the studio because we get a fiber handoff from Verizon, which is common if you've got a business or even commercial personal service here in Rhode Island. There's an ONT in your house or your business that is converting that fiber to Ethernet or to coax or whatever.
So at least when we did ours, we got the ONT for Verizon installed, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're going to take this and we're going to take this coax and we're going to put it on this device."
I'm like, why do you need coax?
I'm like, no, you're not.
You're going to give an Ethernet handoff
because there's an Ethernet port right there. They're going to enable that, and I want Ethernet handoff. And they're like, "But sir, we don't know if we can do that." I'm like, "Yes, you can, because you just make a phone call and they will. And I'm a business customer, so yes, you will."
And I'm a consumer customer, and based on your recommendation, because you told me that story, I had the same thing done in my house, and I'm like, "Just pass me off the Ethernet. Why do I need to mess with coax?" But that's an ONT. But the ONTs from Cisco have vulnerabilities. I thought it was kind of interesting as an attacker if you get on the ONT. Like that's a device
you can do a lot from an ONT,
right? But like that's a device.
That's a mirror port.
Yeah,
it's mounted to our wall. It's not on our Ethernet network necessarily. Like it's
ahead of your monitoring.
Ahead of our monitoring.
It's an IoT device,
right? Exactly my point, Larry.
And this is unauthenticated, so you can actually perform command injection, and you can. So from the ONT, from the web interface, if you can do unauthenticated on a Cisco device, unauthenticated access to the web management, you can change the configuration of this, and you could potentially shut down the network, or you could upload
forward packets.
If I remember right, you can do packet injection and or packet inspection, so you can do mirror porting on the way out. That's pretty bad from a Cisco standpoint of where these ONTs live. So that's actually outside of monitoring of your internal network, and probably outside of the monitoring of the ISP, because they're going to do that back at their core and edge router gateways. So you're living in between multiple monitoring stations.
It's like these devices live in like purgatory.
They do.
The purgatory devices, and you get into that.
Well, that's like the old DOCSIS 3 stuff. Those old DOCSIS 3 cable modem vulnerabilities, where you lived in between the cable network and the local network, but you had full control over both sides of that.
You could see all the traffic. That was my concern with that story, for sure.
For sure.
NPM packages have more vulnerabilities. These were a parser for command line options and a configuration loader.
So I had COA and UA parser JS.
UA parser JS and RC, which is a configuration loader. Similar to like my configuration library in Python that I talked about in my technical segment for Tomo, right?
So which story?
My story number 15. So there were 22 million weekly downloads that were found to be backdoored across two additional libraries.
And mine number 2, and my stories number 2 and 3.
Again, we talked about this last week, didn't we? The NPM packages and like some of the vulnerabilities of like open source code getting owned. That's a bad day.
So the question, we got 3 stories on NPM packages this week. Where's the root cause for this? It's I'd argue that it's not the developers of these packages that are putting this stuff at NPM. Is it NPM that's the source?
Well, they're succumbing to phishing attacks or password spraying that you take over the developer's account. You're able to modify the source code in a package that is used by potentially millions of people. So, and that's why attackers are going after them, because I got to phish one user. And I can own a whole bunch of other users, right? So the payoff is big. And what they're recommending is two-factor authentication for the NPM developers, right? So like if you're an NPM developer, you have to have like a heightened awareness now of your own OPSEC, which isn't happening, right?
This is
developers got a lot going
attack.
on. Like I don't blame them necessarily, right? Hey, you've got a lot going on if you're developing an NPM package, right? I think the other thing too is React and Node has increased exponentially in popularity. Like I used to have conversations like, are you using Angular or using Vue, or like most people now are going to React. Like React is becoming like a lot of places I feel like are moving off of your Java They're not even evaluating like Python or Ruby for your web frameworks. Like they're all, ourselves included, like we're all going to React. And every time we see these stories,
React is the next Java, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. I agree. I agree, Tyler.
And really, this is supply chain attack for DevOps. This is how it's going to happen through libraries and through open source packages that get included with inside of projects or that are used in commercial applications. You might not even know which libraries are leveraged in a commercial application that has dependencies that is getting. Yeah.
Transient dependencies make that super hard too. Like you're like, oh, I'm not importing that library, but the library I'm importing is importing that library. And it's really like open source tools kind of start to fall down when you get into the like weeds of what libraries are you actually using. And transient dependencies are an issue. And I push the vendors on the commercial side to give us really accurate reporting and prioritization of these vulnerabilities. I want to know, and this is hard, I want to know if I'm importing the RC library, right? Maybe it's backdoored, but maybe there's also vulnerabilities in it. But the vulnerability is in these couple methods, in this one method. But in my code, I'm calling the other method. I'm not calling the vulnerable method. So like you need to tell me that so I can prioritize it accordingly, because this may be something that like I can wait for a few more dev cycles before I fix. However, if I'm calling the vulnerable one, I want to fix that now. That's impacting my prioritization of implementing the fix for that. And I'm not saying you shouldn't fix that. In fact, I recommend, and one of the things we do in our own SDLC is we always build with the latest version of the component. So when we build in dev, we build everything with the latest version of components. We automatically update all of our components within Docker, within our Python libraries, React libraries. Everything gets updated. And when something breaks because a method changed, an update changed, it's not compatible with the way we're using the library, we fix that and then we push. So we break the build and we fix that. Now that's not for everyone, right? We run a much smaller application than a lot of enterprises certainly, and we've only got a couple of applications, and enterprises might have thousands, and I understand that, but I think if you can push towards that model of constantly updating and breaking the build, you don't incur that technical debt, and you're in a much better position to go, I got to go from version 1 of Tomcat to version 7. Now I got to update thousands of lines of code versus I'm going to 7.0 to 7.1 and I just got to make this small fix to make it happen.
So I get a question. And there's a comment in there that you said that like, hey, I'm not going to fix this stuff because I'm not using those vulnerable methods that are affected by
today.
Right.
I could use those in the future,
but more to the point that if someone is going to go through the process of compromising a developer's account to inject code into the NPM library, why would they not inject that code into a function that is more commonly used?
Agreed.
As opposed to these sort of less outside cases? You know, is it fear of getting caught?
Great observation.
Recognized? Yep. Like, that's sort of my question. Like, why would they go through that effort?
Maybe they're not developers?
No, I think...
But they've got to be developers enough to have the code to put in there to backdoor the stuff.
They do, and I think you'd put that in a place that it doesn't matter what method I'm calling, just in the importation of the library, my code is executing. Just importing the library.
Agreed. Yeah. Now, arguably, that might be in a spot that is more carefully scrutinized, and by putting it in a lesser used function, might escape that. So, I mean, I'm asking the question out loud. Is that some of the reasons that they may do it this way? But
I think for backdooring it doesn't matter, right? Because when you the way Python works, when you're importing a library, code is getting executed, and it doesn't matter whether you're calling that method or not. I think that only applies to vulnerabilities, not backdoors, because Python interprets all that code when you import it, right? From the way that I understand it, and so my code doesn't have to necessarily call a particular function. If that library is backdoored, that code's already been interpreted. It doesn't matter. Where it matters is if there's a vulnerability, whether on purpose or by mistake, right, in a method inside of a library, that's only going to be triggered. That vulnerability will only be present and triggered if I'm calling that method. I ran into that a lot, actually. I mean, GitHub's doing a great job, but their coverage is not what it is of the commercial vendors. and GitHub will basically flag like, hey, you've got this Python project and you're importing this version of that library, and that version has this vulnerability. And then I dig into it and I go, oh, but that's not a method that I'm calling, right? And it didn't, GitHub, at least at that time, didn't have that level of sophistication to tell me. And actually commercial tools are kind of struggling with that issue as well, because code is really complex. And you know, I could be like, in this build I'm not calling that method, but in the next one I am. So I do think you should just fix it regardless, but it also speaks to the priority and developer priorities. Mm-hmm. Developers are, you know, writing features and fixing other bugs too, right? What else? I think those are all. We talked about that. Types that we can talk about pen testing. It's kind of late to do that because we got to wrap up. Yeah. Maybe we'll save that one for next time, especially when Jeff's on the show.
One real quick. Debunking 5 myths about zero trust.
Yes.
I love the meme that I've seen, and I don't even care about the story. Hey, here we're going to implement zero trust. How do you do that? And then the question is, why do you ask? Like,
I don't trust you.
I don't trust you. Why are you asking this? So, all right, sorry.
That's okay. How THC breathalyzers work was my kind of squirrel story of the week.
Cue the lower third.
I think it's kind of interesting, right? Because
actually, you actually had a better squirrel story, but it was shared in Slack instead.
Oh yeah, that one had to relate to sex toys, and I opted not to include the actress that was in 50 Shades of Grey, that movie. Mm-hmm. She is investing in or spokesperson for a sex toy company, which just it's just
I'm not just the president, I'm also a client,
right? Like it's like the jokes just
Dakota Johnson.
Dakota Johnson is promoting, and she's like, well, sex toys shouldn't look like sex toys. You know, they should look different. And then, like, you look at a picture of the sex toy that she's promoting. I'm like,
it looks like a sex toy.
It looks like a butt plug. Like a butt plug is a butt plug. I'm sorry. Like, that's what it looks like.
To quote the article, okay, this is going in everybody's stocking. You're kidding. It's the perfect stuffing stuffer. You think your uncle hasn't wanted a butt plug his entire life? You're lying.
It says that your uncle?
Yep.
It's in the article.
Yep.
There's crazy articles on the internet. Like, I don't know if
but I don't want that on my credit card statement.
I don't even think this one was made up. Like, I think that was like, they were trying to be serious.
The worst part is the butt plug is called the cone.
The cone, that's what it's called. And it comes in 2 different colors. It comes in green. It
Not
looks
the
like
cone of shame.
So you can bring the Christmas festivities into the bedroom.
Oh, God, just craziness.
All right, so
anyway,
if they made it in green with a star on top, man, that would be hilarious.
They did.
Right? They did.
Close. So close.
Larry said something about tinsel earlier. I'll just leave that to your imagination, John. So the other squirrel story, we had a couple of squirrel stories. Well, the other one was how THC breathalyzers work. Now,
and breathalyzers is in quotes here.
I was at ShmooCon once, right? Like, breathalyzers are a thing, and I mean they're pretty accurate.
They're pretty alcohol.
They're pretty alcoholic. They're pretty accurate. And so
the alcohol
ones are pretty accurate. And so when I was at ShmooCon, we had a breathalyzer. Now, granted, no one was going anywhere because it was one of the
ShmooCons.
We were freaking snowed in. No one's going anywhere.
Yep.
So why do you have a breathalyzer? No one's driving anywhere.
Yep.
But I remember that.
Yeah, the point is that they had it before we were going to get snow, and it just became a thing.
It just became a thing, and we were like, oh well, let's see what everyone's blood alcohol is. And so, like, I blew I don't want to. If you're young and in this field, like, don't drink this much at conferences. But I blew a .27, and like.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Again, we were snowed in. There was nothing else to do but drink. So, like, 0.3 is unconscious. So I was, like, right there. I went to my room and took a nice long. I slept good that night. Let's put it that way. And everyone cheered, and it was one of my favorite ShmooCon kind of moments.
That was also the next day that Mick Douglas slept under the table at the vendor expo at the booth next to the Security Weekly one. I forget who was there, but they left early.
Oh, God. Good times. In any case, how do you have a breathalyzer for THC? So the new test is called Epoch, which I thought was really funny because it has connotations in Unix time. But Express Probe for on-site cannabis inhalation works by collecting and concentrating your saliva to evaluate its current levels for THC. It evaluates whether or not THC levels are above 1 nanogram of THC per milliliter of saliva within a 12-hour consumption window. Which And I think some of the critics are like, how, even if there is remnants of THC in the saliva, like how high is that person at that point in time? I think a breathalyzer for alcohol is a much more accurate measurement for how intoxicated that person is at a point in time. Is THC is a different, like it's just absorbed. It's a different chemical. It's a different drug. It's metabolized by your body differently, right?
Plus, the THC breathalyzers are exorbitant. They're massively expensive. Like when I say very expensive, you're talking probably a Washington D.C. Top tier road patrol might have one unit per 20 or 25 cars. This is not something that you're going to have that's mobile and or suitable for most law enforcement. It is so expensive.
You got to consume a pretty large amount of THC to still be high 12 hours later. I think there's.
But it says
everyone metabolizes it differently too.
I think the biggest one that I took away from this, and is sort of right in some of the content there, is that it's the EPOC, the express probe for on-site cannabis inhalation. What if it's an edible?
Yeah.
What if it's a cannabis enema?
It's
Dr.
Carl Hart.
So you're
Dr. Carl
boofing your cannabis?
There's a great book.
There's plugging your THC.
There's a great book, pretty much on this subject, by Dr. Carl Hart. I heard him on Joe Rogan. He is a PhD professor that has spent the better part of 20, almost 30 years, I believe, studying the effects of drugs on people. Like, he's literally spent his career getting people high with various drugs and studying the effects.
Wait, was that the dude at UC Berkeley that had the FBI come in the 70s? And they were waiting for someone to show signs of being high, and they'd all been smoking the whole time?
Nah, I don't know. I don't think he was at Berkeley. I think he was in New York. I think it was University of Columbia.
That was a case of their, their baseline was already flawed?
No,
their baseline was flawed. They were waiting for someone to be like,
no,
crazy
he wasn't.
high.
He wasn't Berkeley. I want to say he was Columbia. But he wrote a book called Drug Use for Grown-Ups. And he's got this great thing that it's like the dosage, the setting, and the consumption method all affect like the high that a person gets from doing drugs, right? And he goes through each one of them in great detail and speaks authoritatively. I mean, he's spoken in conferences and produced ungodly amounts of academic and research papers on this subject. So to your point, Larry, like, how did you consume your marijuana? Like, did you smoke it? Did you vape it? Did you take an edible? Did you... Like, there's different ways to vape it. Like, was it a tincture? Was it that all affects how your body metabolizes it.
And specifically, the device is called the inhalation.
Right. So, so there's a lot of, interesting things about, and not to say that we shouldn't take this as a serious issue. You should not be operating a motor vehicle or any kind of heavy machinery when you're consuming THC, however that you're consuming it. Probably not the best, it is a drug, like, a lot of other drugs that are out there.
Technically the legal thing is it's driving while impaired. Okay.
Right.
And it's under the influence of alcohol or tobacco or
pharmaceuticals,
cell phones.
Yeah.
Pharmaceuticals.
You don't want to pop a bunch of
deprivation.
Percocet and get behind the wheel. It's the same thing. Absolutely.
If you're too tired to drive, there's no meter for that. There's no breathalyzer for I'm a tired motherfucker. But you should be driving.
Oh, but there is, Josh. There is an app. There's an app for that, Josh. The app is called Druid, and I used it earlier before the show. And Druid, I forget what it stands for. Oh, what does it stand for? It's in the article. Hold on.
There has to be one for TikTok use and texting as well. Like,
oh God.
Hold on. It's Druid.
Driving under the influence of drugs.
Driving under the influence of drugs is an app, and it's a 4-stage test that tests your level of intoxication. And so you have to kind of like follow these like boxes and circles, and it has you go through these different tests. And I was completely sober when I did it, and I have to say it was really hard. And I scored like a 38, which was good. Like, the lower the score, the better. If I was intoxicated under the influence of any kind of drugs or alcohol or whatever, having taken that sober, I can tell you, like, I would have failed miserably Like maybe after the show, after a few glasses of scotch, I'll take it again. It takes a while to go through. I do it on the air, but it takes a while to go through it. But I would probably fail that test pretty badly. You have to balance on one foot and like hold your phone, and it like measures that. So like you hold your phone in your left hand and you raise your left leg and you have to stand there. And like if you've got a few drinks in you, like there's no way you're...
I'd have been screwed before we started that test this week.
Yeah, with your injury you would have, right? Yeah. So there's an app for that too, which could be a better, like it's kind of like an app version of a field sobriety test. I thought it was really interesting. So check it out. The app's called Druid. I think if you're gonna get together with friends and no one's driving, maybe it's a test to see if people can drive home. Right? It could be a really fun thing after you've all had a few drinks. Do it before you start drinking.
Yep.
And then try it again once you've had a few drinks to do these tests. Could be a fun thing.
And to even tie this back to security, even though it was that squirrel story, I mean, measurement and setting baselines and setting appropriate measurements for your environment is
very much you're sober and seeing what you score. I think was a good.
It's very much a security thing. Like make sure you're getting the right logs.
Science for the win.
I am totally installing Druid right now.
It's fun. Yeah, everyone's going to have fun. I'm telling you, it's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be really fun when you're wasted and you fail that test miserably, and like see who fails the test the worst, and you're taking that person's keys if they're going to be driving for sure. It's good stuff. Well, thanks everyone for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Hey, do you know if you have all sorts of bad stuff on your phone that's looking at you that your significant other may have put there that you don't want to know about? I don't know. Come join us on Discord and let's chat about it. Other than that, over and out.